users, groups, and file access. In this nugget, we'll be discussing users, groups, and file access. And we'll start by talking about some of the default local users and groups. I also have a PDF document that you can download to get good reference on that. We'll also take a look at authentication problems. Sometimes a user will say, they think they're using the right username and password, and yet they can't seem to log on. We'll take a look at some causes of that and how to resolve it. We'll also take a look here at sharing folders. This allows you to take a folder and make it available over the network. Once you've made it available over the network, you might want to be more granular with something called NTFS Permissions. So we'll show you about that as well. And we'll talk about some other things such as inheritance and denying permissions and the like. And then we'll conclude with a discussion of the Encrypting Files system, which allows you to encrypt files so that other people can't see it, even if they do have NTFS permissions. And also of BitLocker, which is designed to physically protect hard drives that might get lost or stolen so that the drive is encrypted and nobody can read it. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be talking a lot about NTFS and shared permissions and how those interrelate and so forth. But one of the key things to understand, first of all, before you even get to that, is some more things about group membership. You see, when a user account is created, the level of privilege that they do or do not have really is not based upon that user account so much as it is their membership in a specific security group. So for local Windows computers, you'll have some local Windows group accounts that we need to talk about and understand before we can move on. Now, first of all, let's understand this. These are indeed local Windows group accounts as opposed to corporate domain level accounts. So in the domain, you may have other kinds of groups that you'd be a member of, especially if you were an IT professional. You might be an enterprise admin or a domain admin or a schema admin. Lots of other kinds of administrative groups. And of course, you can create your own groups as well and give them varying levels of privileges. But by default, we're looking at the local Windows group accounts, of which a person could commonly be a member. All right. Now, the first one there will be guests. And the guest security group, by default, doesn't actually do much of anything. By default, there is actually one single user account named guest, that would be singular, and the guest user account is a member of the guests, plural, security group. Now, the guest account is actually disabled by default on current Windows operating systems, but if you wanted to, you could enable it. Now, what we would do with this is we'd be able to just log in and log out, run any installed applications, just kind of click your way through the file system and shut down the system. But you really can't do anything else. And in fact, even if you were to create certain files or make preferential changes to, interface items, all of those are removed at the time that the user logs out. So this is really just for temporary purposes, maybe for someone who literally is just a guest, somebody from out of the office, maybe they need to log on real quick to check their email or something like that. You could use something like this for that type of a purpose. And also, let me go ahead and just show you that account. So if I go into computer management here on a Windows Vista computer, then remember, this is how we get there. We go to right-click on the computer and then choose Manage. That's how I got here. We've been here before. And then we see this guests security group right here. So if I double-click on this, we see that we only have a member of this as the singular guest account. Now, if I go up here to Users, we see that that guest account is disabled. You can see that by that little tiny black down arrow. That means that that account is disabled by default, as is the local administrator account. And this is for security purposes because with Windows Vista, when you first set it up, it asks you to create an additional user account, which I've done here with my trainer account. And that one is also a member of the administrator's security group, so I have full control over it here. The reason why these two accounts are disabled is because a lot of hackers will know that all Windows systems have at least these two accounts by default, and so they can attempt to log on as one of those accounts, preferably, of course, the administrator account. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Here we also have the users security group, and this would be anybody that you create. If I go into control panel or computer management in that interface that I just showed you, and I create a new user account accepting all default values, then it's going to make that user a member of the users security group. These people can do a lot of different things. This is the productive user that has everyday office types of responsibilities. They can work with their own data files in all these different ways. I won't read all these verbatim, but you get the idea. They can run their applications. They can change their preferences, what color wallpaper they want, and so forth. And those changes will be saved after a log off. They can access the network and do printing, and they can also do anything that a guest can already do. They cannot do these things, however. They cannot do system-wide types of settings because those things would affect the operating system security or stability, or would affect other users. And anybody that's a member of this user security group here really can only affect their own preferences and so forth. So that's the kind of the idea there, and you can get an idea for what you see on those items. Now, the other thing that we would have here would be the power users account. There is not a power user singular account here, nor is there a singular user account. But again, any users you create will be members of this. If you want someone to be a power user, you need to make sure that you add them to that security group because it's a little bit of a higher privilege. We can do all the things that a user can, but we can also do additional things such as create additional local user accounts. Okay, so you can certainly do that. You can modify accounts that I have created as a power user. If someone else has created a user account, then I might not have permission over it, because when you create an account as a power user, you become what's called a creator owner of that account. So since I created it, then I automatically own it, and then I have full ability to be able to make modifications to it. All right. Now, what I can do with this as well is to change the user permissions on my users or power users or guests. Notice that I cannot change permissions on higher level administrators' accounts. All right. Also, I can install and run applications, again, that don't affect the entire operating system. I can customize settings, control panel settings, things like this, change the date and the time. And but the things that I cannot do is to access other users' data without permission. So I can't just browse to somebody else's folder and start, deleting files or modifying files or anything like that. I don't have that level of privilege, and I cannot delete or modify user accounts that I did not create as a member of power users. Okay. And then finally, there's administrators, which is the highest level security group membership that you can get on a local computer. And I can do pretty much anything. Just about everything here that I can do. And there's not really anything that's prevented from this administrator's security group. So then if I want to create a user account, I can do so directly in this interface. I can just right-click here, choose New User, and then I would just call them, Sam or somebody like this. And I could give them a full name if I want, Sam Jones, and a description if I want to, HR manager. You don't have to fill that stuff in. I do have to have the username, and I do need to put in a password for security purposes, of course. Then very often what we will do is, as administrators or someone with a higher level account, which is creating user accounts, like a power user as well, then we will leave this checkbox selected so that the user must change the password at the next logon. See, right now, I know the user's password because I just put it in. But if they change the password at the next logon, then that kind of gives me plausible deniability. So I can say, well, that user changed their password. I don't know what it was, so you can't claim that I logged on as that person and deleted all those files that somebody's in trouble about. Okay, that sort of thing. You can also specify that the user cannot change the password. This is not something we very often do for generic user accounts. That might be done for a service account. We can also say the password never expires. This might also be something that you would do for a service account, or maybe a test account or something like that. Normally, we don't do an awful lot of that, though. And then also, account is disabled. We would probably not do that on a new user account unless Sam is a new user. It's Friday afternoon. I'm creating the account right now. Sam is a new person that starts work on Monday. I can close a brief security window of the weekend by disabling the account for that period of time, and then when he comes in on Monday, I'll disable his account and allow him to log on, and then of course change his password at the next logon. That's probably the most common setting is this one right here that you'll see. Okay, for my purposes, I'm going to go ahead and leave it this way because I'm going to log on as Sam Jones, so it's not like there's any secrets from myself. in terms of the password, and I'm just going to go ahead and create this user account. Now, if I have additional user accounts to create, I can, of course, create those here as well. I'm pretty much done, though, so I'm just going to click Close. Now, when I double-click on the Sam account, notice what he is a member of. He's a member of the users security group. If I realized that Sam was going to be a higher-level user, I could also add him to the power users security group. Okay, if I was not sure about the spelling, I can click Check Names, and it'll double-check on that for me. Okay, and then now Sam is going to be a higher level person, not quite a full administrator, but has some additional level of privilege beyond that just of the user's security group. Now, this is the interface here in computer management where we've got our local users and groups that many administrators or people with more administrative experience will use to create these user accounts as well as security groups. Most novice users that have any kind of account management responsibilities will probably use Control Panel. Same is true of like home users. Here's where we can also create groups. So if I right-click here, I can choose New Group. Sam is the member of, or he's in the HR department, so maybe I want to create a new group here called HR, and then I would just maybe add in Sam as a member. So I'll type in Sam here, and there he goes. All right. Now, the advantage for doing this is if I have additional users that are in the HR department, I can continue to add them in here, and then I can assign permissions to the HR security group for various files and folders and so forth. And that way I don't have to assign permissions to each individual user. I just assign permissions to this single HR group, and in doing so, it also encompasses all the users that are members of this group. Now, let me also show you the other interface that probably users, home users, and people that are a little bit more novice would use. That would be to just go to Control Panel. This can be found on the Start menu, of course. And then we would go to User Accounts, or we could click directly to Add or Remove User Accounts. Of course, you do have to have some level of administrative privilege. So if I was a power user, I could create an account. Or if I was a member of the administrator's security group, I can click on Continue here as well. And then what I would do is here we would see some accounts that we've already created, like Sam Jones, and then I would just choose Create a New Account. Notice that the interface for this is more wizard-driven, and I would just call this one, maybe Joette. It's kind of a cool name. Don't really know anyone named Joette, but it sounds cool, so we'll do that. This is the standard user. All right. This really just means that she is going to be a member of the user's security group. It doesn't say that here because it's kind of simplified for the novice. I could also make this person an administrator. I would not be able to do this as a power user. I would only be able to do this as an administrator, and I'm a member of the administrator's security group now, which I'm going to confirm for you, by the way, by typing Who Am I? All, and this will tell you that when I type that in, let me show you the command again up at the top, Who Am I? All right, it tells me who I am on the trainer account, and I'm a member of the security group, including administrators. That's why I'm able to create additional administrators if I want. Otherwise, this would be grayed out. But I'll create the account, and then that's pretty much it. Oops, I went too far. I create the account, and there's my standard user now of Joette. Notice that when I created the account using this kind of dumbed-down interface, that it did not give me an opportunity to supply a password for this user. So she could log on the first time without a password, but then she would have to change the password right away, or I can create the password for this user just to make sure we get that out of the way here. And then we could give that user a password hint as well. We don't normally see this in corporation or like in domain environments. We don't have this normally, but for local systems like this, you might. Let's just say our password is, my cat's name. Okay, this would obviously be a little bit obvious. If other people in the office knew her cat's name, then they would be able to log on as that person. But anyway, I'll just click Create Password for this user, and that's pretty much it. So this is kind of a simplified, a little bit of a dumbed-down interface for people to be able to create accounts with if they're more novice. And then here I've returned to computer management to show that indeed the Joette account does appear. Now, if you experiment on with this on your own, by the way, and you decide to kind of mirror some of the actions I've done, you may return here to the user's container and not notice this new account that you have created. That will very often be the case because the MMC console that we're working with here is kind of notorious for not refreshing very often. So if you press the F5 key on the keyboard, then that account will probably pop up. Okay. Also, let's take a look at our membership and some other accounts, characteristics of our account. One thing to keep in mind is that when the computer is not a member of a domain and you're working with local accounts only, normally these accounts are going to be created, if you use that control panel interface, with passwords that do not expire. There it is, passwords that do not expire right here. Okay. So just be aware of that. And this is a member of the user's account, as I mentioned earlier. Now let's move on into problems that these users might have in terms of authentication problems. This is an A+ exam objective, so we'll go ahead and address this a little bit. Normally it's going to be human error. I'll just call it gracefully logon error of some kind, but very often it's a forgotten password. I mean, someone changed their password on Friday and they can remember it throughout the end of the day on Friday, but then over the weekend they went to the lake and had a few brews and they killed some brain cells, so that when they came back to the office on Monday, turns out the brain cells they killed actually contained that password. So now they can't remember it and they have to call, the help desk or somebody like that to reset it. If you do have to reset a user's password, it's not too hard to do. You simply go in here to the computer management item, you right-click on the user's account, and choose Set Password. And then you can go ahead and proceed and enter in their new password here and repeat it. Okay, so that's pretty much all you have to do for resetting the user's password. Other things that they might do is have the caps lock key turned on. Now, very often in current versions of Windows, if you have caps lock on, then it will give you a warning right there in the interface before you type in your password. But many users ignore that or just don't happen to see it. So if you're on a help desk call with this, make sure that they do have caps lock turned off. Also, keep in mind that they may be logging on locally as opposed to the domain. Now, what we've been working with so far is really just local accounts, but this is actually going to be a totally different kind of a logon than you would have for a domain account. And then by way of example, here I have joined this Windows 2000 professional computer to the AccuSource domain, which is my own domain. And I might try to log on, and I might be getting denied logon. Why would that be? Well, if I'm using the, for example, administrator account with a password that is normally used on the local computer account, by looking at the interface, there's no real way to tell which one I'm logging on to. Because this account that would be a local administrator account will have a different SID and an actual different identity than the domain administrator account. They're two totally different accounts, even though they're spelled the same. All right. Now, a way to confirm what you're actually logging on to would be to click on Options here, and then I'd say, oh, I'm trying to log on to this computer as opposed to the domain, or vice versa. So that's how you can work with that as well here. Another thing you could do is you can type in the name of the domain first, such as AccuSource / administrator, and that would then force it to log on to the domain. Or I could do it to the local computer account instead, which I forgot what it was called, W2K Pro. Okay, so I could just do it this way as well if I wanted to just log on to the local computer, W2K Pro, and then enter in the password there, and then it would allow me to log on to the local computer instead. So a couple of different ways of doing that. And then finally, there's also another way of doing this if you want to log on to the domain, and that would be, administrator at accusource.net. Notice that, actually .local, I guess it is here. Notice that as soon as I entered in the @ sign, that it grayed out the logon to domain, because it knows that I'm going to enter in the actual domain I'm going to log on to right up here at the top. So several different ways of being able to log on there. Now, one of the things that could be going on here is that you might have an account that is locked out. Normally, you'll see this more likely in a domain environment, because there's a security policy that can be set that says that after, for example, 3 failed logon attempts, to lock that user's account for maybe 30 minutes. And this is all configurable in terms of the number of failed attempts and how long the account is locked out. But this might be an account where the user forgot the password. They thought they knew it, so they kept logging on or trying to log on with that password. And after 3 attempts, their account could get locked. If that's the case, then you would need to then unlock it. Let's say that this was the case with Sam here. Kept logging on with the wrong password and he got locked. Well, in a domain here, I would have to be able to then unlock that account. Notice that here on a local account, I don't have that option. You don't really have that limitation here. Although certainly in a domain, you could have locked accounts. Then you would just have to right-click on those accounts to unlock them. Then you can also have disabled accounts, as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. This would be true in the domain or locally. Here, for example, I've created a user account named Yvonne. And this Yvonne user account, notice that it's got the little black down arrow on it. Well, if it's been disabled, all I have to do here is to right-click on it and choose Enable Account. And it's pretty much the same for local accounts as well. Now this account should be good to go again and ready to log on. The other thing you might run into is there's no domain controller available. Now, if I created Sam's new user account that we worked with earlier, and we issued Sam a new laptop for his new job, well, if Sam tries to log on to it, but nobody ever turned on the wireless network card, usually there's a switch on those laptops to enable or disable the wireless network card. If that switch is turned off and Sam's trying to log on, then he will not be able to contact the domain controller to authenticate his username and password credentials. Okay, so that could be one issue. The other issue would be maybe he does have the wireless network card turned on, but he's logging on his first day from a different office where he doesn't have access to our domain controller. Or another option there might be maybe, and this is very often the case with traveling, salespeople and sales reps and so forth. If they're out of the office for an extended period of time, like 30 days, then the computer password attempts to reset at about the 30-day interval. And if it does not reset, then it does not authenticate against the domain, and then the user account can't log on either. So that could be another situation there where the computer's just been out of the office too long. It would have to come back into the office and be rejoined to the domain before the user could then attempt to log on as well. By the way, all of that is probably way more information than you really need for A+. That just happens to be Active Directory information that's just in my head, and I can't help but escape. Now, when the user does log on, they may continue to have problems accessing resources. So if they have resource access problems, this is actually known as authorization. You see, authentication is when we prove who we say we are, whether it's through biometrics, like an optical scanner, fingerprint scanner, or just a conventional username and password, or a smart card, those sorts of things. When we prove who we say we are, we have been authenticated. Once we're authenticated, we try to get access to something that's called authorization. And I can see whether or not I'm authorized to access a file share or to use a printer or something like this. So if somebody is trying to access something and they call you and say, hey, I'm not able to access this folder or use this printer, for example, check their group membership. Maybe they're not a member of the group that has been assigned permissions on that, or maybe you need to add the group to that printer's permissions or something like this. And then just check again the share and NTFS permissions, which is about what we're going to get into more detail here shortly. And before we start our discussion here about NTFS and share permissions, I first want to point out that when it comes to permissions and sharing things, there's a couple of locations here you really don't ever want to share or change permissions with. That would be program files, or if you're on a 64-bit OS, the program files directory and the program files x86 directories, and the Windows directory. Now, the reason for that is because, by default, they're usually set up with pretty good security settings as they are, and they're also generally pretty compatible. The only kind of situation I can think of where you might want to change these system files and folders permissions that we're discussing here would be if you had a software vendor that insisted on changing certain permissions there in order to get the application to work. If that's the case, you might just have no choice if that's a mission-critical application and you can't live without it. Otherwise, don't ever change those things because you can significantly open up yourself to security vulnerabilities, system instability, and possibly corrupting your operating system. And it may also, of course, corrupt your applications. Now, another thing you don't want to change permissions for is the root of the drive. So, for example, we're going to be addressing share and NTF permissions shortly here, but just right from the outset, I want to point out you should never right-click on the root of the drive and choose share. You rarely, if ever, would you ever want to share the entire hard drive. That would share things such as the Windows folder or the program files folder, other sensitive locations which could then be subject to attack. So just don't ever do that. And also don't ever change the permissions on the root. Again, I can't think of many situations in which you'd want to do that. This is one of those things where if it's not broken, don't fix it. Okay, the default permissions usually work very, very well. If you want to change permissions on something, change them on folders that you have created that you have a high level of control over. Now, that having been said, I would like to point out that there is something called a hidden administrative share on each root of each drive. And this means then that if I have administrative credentials for a destination computer over the network, then I can access that entire drive even though nothing has been explicitly shared to me. And that's, of course, what sharing is just we make something available over the network so that someone else can be able to access it without having to visit my computer locally. So, for example, I think I have my desktop computer here, and that would be whack whack James Win 764, that's the name of my computer. And if I put in a $, that $sign is the key. That means that I'm going to access the C drive as an administrator. Okay, and I press enter here. And then what's going to happen here is in a moment, it's going to prompt me with the credentials. So, and there it is. It's going to say, hey, you're trying to access the administrative share. You better prove you're an administrator. So I'm going to enter those in, and once I click OK, then we'll see that I have access to that entire hard drive. Then having entered in those credentials, you can see now that I can access and browse this entire hard drive because of the hidden administrative share. Now also, if you want to identify any administrative shares that are located on a system, you can return here to the computer management, and having gone into this after administrative permission from user account control, go up here to shared folders and then shares, and that'll show you all of the administrative shares. You can see here that there's also the admin $sign. This means that if you type in, \\, the name of the computer, \, and then admin $sign, it'll take you right to the Windows directory. But I usually just type in C $sign and then browse my way to the Windows directory if that's where I really want to go. And then this last thing here, IPC, is not anything that we directly are concerned about, but what this does is it facilitates communication between computers and their various processes using server message blocks, which is just kind of a building block of network communications between systems. Now let's step back a moment here and talk about shares in a little bit more of a broader sense and a little bit more context for how they're generally used, not just with administrative shares. First thing to keep in mind is that a share is really for the network only. This has no relation to local permissions. So if I'm seated at a computer, I should be able to browse probably most of the resources on the computer, regardless of whether or not anything is shared at all. If I'm concerned about someone locally browsing resources, then I'm going to have to use something more like NTFS permissions instead. Also, keep in mind that the share permissions are usually the first line of defense, and as a result, they're also a little bit more broad settings. This is because it's kind of the opening to the, if you think of a bank, the front doors of the bank, just about anybody can walk in there. But as far as the safe is concerned, where the safe deposit boxes are, that's a lot more specific. You have to have an account with a lockbox. You have to have a key for the safe deposit box. So it's a little bit more specific. Similarly, share permissions are like the front door of the bank, and the lockbox portion of the bank is more like NTFS permissions because they're much more specific. It's best to share your permissions, to adjust your share permissions and combine them with wise NTFS permissions. This again is going to be broad access, and then if you want to be more granular about who can access specific files and folders inside of the share, then you'll use NTFS permissions. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you share something, deny always wins over in share permissions. And we'll see that here in just a moment. And then I already addressed administrative shares, but for the time being, let's just go ahead and take a look at how we can work with some shares. So by way of example for sharing, let's demonstrate that a little bit. Here I've got the local disk C, and maybe I've got a share here. Maybe we want to go ahead and share this to everyone. Okay, so maybe I'll right-click on this, and I'll just choose Share, and I'll show you how this is normally done. The interface might be slightly different if you're working with Windows 2000. In fact, it's completely different if you're working with Windows 2000. But I'll show you here in a moment how you can access the same interface that you get with Windows 2000. Here, though, we see that the trainer is the owner. In other words, the account that I'm logged on as, you can see right here, the trainer account. That account created this share, so I'm the owner, but I can add additional people if I want them to be able to share this folder. I'll just say, how about everyone? Okay. Now, I have to remember to click on Add. Now everyone is able to read these documents. Then I'll go ahead and click on Share. Now, with administrative permission, this is a shared folder, and if I want to, I can even send an email to people that'll have this link in it, and then they can, map a network drive to it or something like this. Okay. But I'm just going to click on Done. Now you notice that it has the little sharing icon on it. So here you can see that over the network on a different computer, I'm going to drag it in here, I have connected to this share. Okay, so I just connected over the network to Vista Client 01, and now I can see that share. What's in the world? Oh, company picnic plans. That sounds like a lot of fun. Wonder what kind of things are going on here with this company picnic. Well, I can double click on that, and it's kind of went off screen here, so let me bring it over here. And we can see that, oh, we have a lot of fun things going on for the company picnic. Boy, I wonder if I'm even supposed to see this, because this looks like, some surprises they're keeping out for us. Food provided to underlings. Like, I guess that just means company generic employees. Chip and dip, burgers and hot dogs, snow cones. Well, that sounds like a great time. Hey, wait a minute. What's this down here? Foot? That's supposed to say food, by the way. Food to be provided to executives. Salmon, filet mignon, lobster, escargot, caviar, and bananas Foster for dessert. Hey, wait a minute. That doesn't seem quite right. What else we got going on here? Ooh, entertainment prevented to underlings. Well, maybe that'll make up for the food. A bounce house. Oh, great. Last year at the company picnic, we had a bounce house, and Sweaty Freddy dominated the thing, and nobody else wanted to get in there with him. Okay, so that was no fun. And we had a party clown. Oh, boy, that was delicious and fun. Did I say just delicious? No, we don't eat the clown, people. We just let them have fun. Anyway, wow, the more I talk about this, the creepier it gets. Okay, somebody stop me here. All right. Then we have helium balloons. That's not so... Hey, look at this. A raffle for the NASCAR race. That sounds like a lot of fun. But wait a minute. What's this down here? Entertainment provided to executives. A Cirque du Soleil private show? Hey, people, I saw Cirque du Soleil in Orlando. If you ever get a chance, you've got to see them. Fantastic. A Coldplay concert. That's one of my favorite groups. What in the world? Hot air balloon rides? Those cost hundreds of dollars. And a raffle for a 14-day Caribbean cruise. This does not seem quite right. You know what, though? This was shared to everyone. Maybe it shouldn't have been shared quite like that. We may need to adjust these permissions. Now then, here I've switched over to an XP computer, and it doesn't really matter that it's XP, just another Windows computer is all I'm emphasizing here, where I've logged on as Sam. Now, without getting into a lot of complexity with this, this is also a local computer account named Sam that I created on this XP computer with the same exact password as the user account that I created on the Vista computer that you saw me create earlier. And the reason why I did that is because when the account is created locally, it cannot be used somewhere else. So if I want to access resources across the network without having to enter in credentials or having a pop-up dialog where I have to enter in a username and a password, then my SAM account here has to be the same spelling and password as the destination computer, which is Vista Client 01, that I'm trying to connect to. And then what Windows does is it uses what's called Passthrough Authentication, where it will just pass my existing username and password across the network to this destination computer, and if they match, then it will just allow me to connect. Okay, so here we have the company picnic plans. Okay, now double click on this, and what if I don't like this? What if I say, hey, this is not fair? My name's Sam, and I say these guys down here should not have that. We should have that up here instead, and they should have no food whatsoever. Now I'm going to save that, and we'll teach them a lesson. Or wait a minute, maybe not. Now why can't I save this? Well, because I am just a average user here. I am not an administrative account, and remember, the everyone permission was read-only. So I can open this up and get nice and bitter about it, but there's not a darn thing I can do to change that document. So that being the case, maybe Sam decided to take one of the folks from the IT department to lunch and said, hey, if I buy you a nice steak dinner, would you change these sharing permissions for me by right-clicking on that folder, and then you can choose Share, and then change the sharing permissions, add my little nefarious name into this mix, click on Add there, and then instead of making me a reader, which is the same permission I already have because I'm part of everyone up here, instead of making me a reader, how about making me a contributor? That would be the same as giving me change permission. If you're accustomed to previous versions of Windows where it had a different interface here, that would have been the same as change permissions. If I had changed it here to co-owner, that would have been the same as full control. Microsoft has changed the verbiage of this to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So anyway, now we click on Share and Continue. And done. And now when Sam goes to that document, he's going to be able to change it and save the changes. So now, here Sam's logged on again here. Now he sees this company picnic plans. He double clicks on it and he says, this isn't right. I'm going to switch this around. See if I can get away with this. I'm going to put that down there. And then I'm going to take this good food here. And I'm going to put it up here for us underlings to eat. Okay, hopefully nobody will catch this and won't get in trouble. So anyway, he switched things around now, and he saves changes. Yes, and he's so happy. You can just see him sitting there, doing jazz hands and all that kind of stuff. In fact, you can't see me right now, of course, but even I'm so excited I'm doing jazz hands. It's probably a picture you want to get out of your head right now. Anyway, so that's how we can adjust the sharing permissions, and as a result, we can control what the user is capable of doing. Well, now back over here on the Vista computer where this share was originally located, someone looked this up. One of the executives opened this file up and noticed that somebody changed this around. That's not right. So he's upset. He found out that it was Sam that did this. So he can so what he tells us is the administrative staff, the IT department, has to right-click on Share to All and change those shared permissions. But watch this. This is where we have a little bit of a limitation. If I click on Share and change the sharing permissions, notice that there's no way for me to deny Sam Jones permission. I could click Remove, okay, and I'll do that even. But he's still part of everyone, so everyone still has read access. But what if they're trying to, what if they got a vendetta against just Sam? And we just want to deny only Sam, but everyone else can be able to read this thing. Then what we would have to do is to be more granular and go to Properties, then go to the Sharing tab. From here, we can go to Advanced Sharing. If I click this up here, this takes me to the same thing I was already looking at. But if I click on Advanced Sharing, then this will give me the same interface that we saw in previous versions of Windows, and like XP in 2000. And then what I would be able to do is go to the permissions here, and now I can choose Sam Jones Deny. Just deny everything. Can't change, can't read, nothing. Then I'll click OK. Are you sure you want to deny? Because that always overrides everything, and I'll OK everything there. And then, of course, when Sam tries to go back into that same document, then he'll double-click on this. Completely denied. It says, directory name invalid, but really, he's just denied entirely from being able to access this thing. In fact, the only reason why we can even see it at all is because this window was still open. If I were to close that and try to reopen the same share, it wouldn't even allow me to browse to this location to even see the file name. So the executives got together and they said, hey, if Sam's going to do this to us, we're going to put him on the picnic cleanup crew, along with anybody else that decides they want to complain, okay? So that's what they've decided to do now. Now, the challenge next is they want Sam to be able to see this folder over the network so that he can know he's on the picnic cleanup crew, but they don't want him to be able to even open the company picnic plans. If they change the share permissions and deny him permission over the share, he won't be able to see either one. That's too broad, and that's going to kill both of the objectives. So now what are we going to do? Well, this is where you turn to NTFS Permissions. And what happens with NTFS Permissions is it's really pretty much the primary file access control. It's the overriding way of controlling who can see or modify different things. It's also going to be much more complex than just a generic share. So you do have to be aware of that. And we'll see that a little bit here as we go along. As with share permissions, a deny on any of the NTFS permissions will always win out. It will be denied access to that resource. Also, we'll take a look here in a moment of the effects of moving or copying NTFS files. So first of all, if I go back to the shares here, you're going to see that on the sharing permissions that I've just gone back to making it the way that it was before. Okay, so that we have everyone as reader. We don't have Sam in this anywhere. We didn't deny him permission anymore to the share. As a result, if I go back over to Sam, then we can see that he is now able to see these documents. He can see that document, but we really don't want that. And we can see that he identifies that he's on the picnic cleanup crew. Okay. Now this again is too broad. So we want to lock him out of this file, but allow him to see this file. And we can do that by using our NTFS permissions by going to the company picnic plans, choosing Properties, and then Security. Now the Security tab could just as easily have said NTFS or something like that instead of what it does say. But what we will do with this is we're going to edit this so that even though Sam does have the ability to read and execute this because he's part of everyone here, we want to also take Sam here and we want to deny him certain permissions. So to do that, we'll select his name, choose Edit here, and actually we don't have to select his name, just choose Edit, then choose this person's name, and then we will deny any access to this item. Okay, then we'll click OK. Are you sure you want to deny it? Yes. and OK. Now, as we switch back over to Sam's XP computer, when we press F5 here to refresh the screen, we'll notice that he can no longer see that other document that identifies the food and the entertainment and all of that. He can only see the picnic cleanup crew, and that's all he knows about this picnic. Now, if Sam comes back into our good graces, maybe he groveled and begged for forgiveness or something, then maybe we would grant him access again to the company picnic plans. Now, as a review here, real quick, let's go back to the properties and security. Remember, the reason why he can't see it right now is because he's denied access on everything. Okay. Well, sometimes that gets to be confusing, especially because a deny is so overwhelming and always kind of the trump card for everything. If you've got dozens or even hundreds of files and folders in this, it can get really complicated trying to determine who can do what. So I'm going to show you two things here. First of all is an effective permissions item, and secondly would be how you can use the power of inheritance to kind of override things. So here I'm going to go into the properties of that file again. I'm going to go back to security and then go down here to advanced. Notice that there's an effective permissions tab here. If I'm not really quite sure what permissions Sam has, because he's a member of multiple groups and some have varying levels of permission and so forth, I can click select here and type in Sam, and I can see what level of permission he has. Okay. And now, as I scroll down through this, I see he has no permissions whatsoever. Okay. What if I change that user account? What if I added in instead, trainer? Okay. And I added that person in. We'll notice that the trainer account has full control over everything. Okay, so this is a new tab that came out with Windows Vista, which makes it a lot easier to decipher what kinds of permissions various users will have. Now, if this got to be really complicated and we just wanted to reset all these permissions to what the permissions are on the parent folder right here, then I could right-click on this and go to Properties and use the power of inheritance to flood the permissions on down through all the children. And then by going to the Advanced tab, or button right down here, then I could go into Edit, and then I could say replace all existing inheritable permissions on all descendants with inheritable permissions from this object. In other words, whatever the permissions are already right here, I'm going to apply those to all of the children. It will replace any explicit permissions that have been set. And now when I go back into this document and look at its security tab, you'll notice that there is not a deny on Sam here anymore. Okay, so by doing that, we've flooded the permissions of the parent folder on down to the children. And then if I go back over to Sam's logon over here, we'll see that he can once again now see the company picnic plans. Now, again, of course, this only applies to NTFS permissions. If this original file system is actually a FAT32 file system, I won't get any of the capabilities to be granular in the level of control that I just showed you. All that really relates to NTFS. Now, FAT32 and other file systems can still use shared permissions, but those security tab items that I showed you, only NTFS allows that. So if I am on FAT32, for example, and I want to convert it to NTFS, then I would have to type convert the drive letter C:, in this case, the file system to NTFS. That's the command line that I would type in to convert it to NTFS. This would actually require that I restart the computer because the C volume is mounted and in use by the operating system right now, so it would have to be rebooted. If it was an additional drive, like a D drive or an E drive or whatever, then it might allow me to do that in this case. And I don't know that this is an exam issue, but I just want you to know about that kind of as an FYI. Now let's take a look at something else here, and that would be what happens when you copy or move a file or folder to a different location. Okay, so here if I look at our security permissions again, then we notice that Sam Jones here has, he's inherited permissions that are modified. What if I decide to go ahead and edit this and give Sam Jones full control? Okay, so I'll click at full control and click OK and click OK. Now, it doesn't really matter that he has full control or whatever the specific permission is. All I want to show you is that I made a change. Now, the key thing to remember, I could go through all different kinds of descriptions with this, but the key thing to remember about moving or copying files and whether or not it retains its original permissions is this. The only time it will retain its permissions is when you move it to another location on the same volume. So, if I drag and drop this to whatever this folder is, okay, and if we go to the permissions of this same document now, then we'll see that Sam Jones has full control. So he retained that explicit full control permission whenever we moved him to another location on the same volume. Now, back here, if I were to instead copy this, and I'm holding down Control now to the destination location, then when we go over here, we'll see that the actual permissions now are nothing. They're just inherited from the original folder of the, whatever this is, ACT data. Okay? So that's the key thing to remember. The only time it retains its permissions is when you move it to another location on the same volume. Now, this can get more complicated when you take a look at cumulative share and NTFS permissions, as well as if you combine the two. So let's take a look at that. For example, maybe my user account is a member of 3 separate groups. One of the groups that my account is a member of has full control. The second group has change permission. The third group has read permission. What's the cumulative effect of my capabilities on this share since I'm a member of all 3 of the groups here? Well, in this case, you would have the most liberal permission. Okay? So if you have group membership to each group that has each one has different permissions, you always wind up with the most liberal permission. Same is true of NTFS permissions. If I'm a member of one group that has modify only permission and another group that has read only permission, then what I get is the most liberal of the two. And so again here, I would wind up with modify permission. Okay. Now let's take a look at something else that might happen though. What would happen here is if I had both the share permission of full control and NTFS permissions of, let's say, read-only access. Okay? Then what would happen? Would I have full control once I connected through the share and I accessed the files and folders inside of it? Well, what happens here is the most restrictive of the two will win. So in that case, the read access would be the effective permission between share plus NTFS permissions. Now, another thing we could do is we could use something called EFS, or the Encrypting Files system, if we wanted to prevent people from being able to see this file, even if they normally had share and or NTFS permissions to at least read it. Okay? So people can see this, but we want to completely conceal it from them, even though they have permission. What I could do with that is I could go to the properties of the file, go to Advanced, and I can encrypt the contents to secure the data and click OK and then OK again. And then I want to encrypt the file only. You can also choose the file and its parent, but I'm going to choose only that one file. Then what happens is, notice that it changes color. For the user that owns this file and that encrypted it, well, we have the ability to fully modify this and transparently edit it the same way we might always have had permissions in the first place. But other people that now try to access this, notice that when I try to double click on this now, I'm access denied, even though if I go to the permissions or the properties of it, I would have seen that I actually have permission to be able to at least read it. But because it's been encrypted now, I no longer have that capability. Now let's conclude here with a discussion of BitLocker. What this does is it encrypts the entire drive. What I just showed you there with EFS, that encrypts an individual file or a folder, but BitLocker is full drive encryption. The reason why you might want to do this is for systems that are physically insecure, such as insecure servers. Maybe you have a small branch office and you've got some servers in there, like Windows Server 2008 servers, that are not as physically secure as they might otherwise be. It's a simple hollow door that's protecting this server room as much as they call it, and someone could kick it in and run off with the server. Well, if they do, we don't want them to be able to perform an offline attack, which is where they could take ownership of the drive and then be able to read all of the contents of that drive, or reinstall a different operating system on it, and again, take ownership or change permissions of the files that are on that server. Same would be true of a laptop. You don't want someone to be able to perform an offline attack of the laptop either. And another example of that is, you can put Linux on something like a USB flash drive, boot from it, and then change all the permissions that were NTFS permissions on the hard drive, and then be able to view them. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to protect ourselves from with BitLocker. What this requires is one of the more current operating systems, such as Windows Vista or Windows 7. For server side, you can also do it with Windows Server 2008. And it also requires something called a Trusted Platform Module. This is something that's going to be integrated into the motherboard, and it's a kind of a safe box for the encryption keys for BitLocker. When the system boots up properly and it detects that it has not been tampered with or that there's not an offline attack in progress, then it will allow that key to be released and then to decrypt the drive and for the system to boot normally. The user experience of this is completely transparent in most cases. Also, this does also require a second volume, because what happens here is, if this is my hard drive, then if I want to encrypt this whole thing, then I won't be able to boot the system anymore. Because I have to be able to at least access the boot files, right here, as the first volume, and then the rest of this can all be the second volume. Okay. If I were to encrypt the boot files, then there would be no way to ever boot the machine. So that will be left unencrypted, and then after the boot process gets started here, it will then be able to access the TPM, release the key, and then it will decrypt the rest of the volume so that I can access it. Anyway, just be aware of the fact that BitLocker is an additional option that's available for Vista or Windows Server 2008, or like I said before, Windows 7, even though 7 and 2008 are not part of the exam. In this nugget, we talked about users and groups and file access. We started off by talking about the default local users and groups. Remember, in a domain, there's a lot more than these, but we have at least things such as power users, guests, administrators, and the associated user accounts that are also members of those groups. We took a look at authentication problems that people sometimes run into, such as just forgetting their password or getting locked out. We took a look also at shared folders. And the way you do this is, of course, you right-click on a folder and you choose to share it, and that makes it available over the network, although it doesn't have any local security implications. NTFS, however, does have both local and network security implications, and you can be much more granular with what people are able to do with NTFS permissions. We took a look also at the encrypting file system, which is a great way to conceal a file from prying eyes, even if the users would otherwise have at least read-only permission to that file. Well, you can prevent them from even being able to open it with EFS. And then BitLocker, of course, is designed to protect us from physical exploits when people are able to steal laptops or servers and be able to then look at the contents of the drive. With BitLocker, it encrypts the entire drive so that they're not able to do that. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.